So, guys, I'm going to do another video series a little bit sooner talking about mental illness in the black community and black fatigue. And it kind of ties into what I want to talk about today. Like, I do have something called Tough Stories where I talk about, some types of, harshness or disrespect or just, bad situations I dealt with as a kid. And sometimes it was kind of like, disrespect and emotional abuse, and sometimes it's just, bad parenting choices. So I want to talk about like the toothbrushing incident that happened to me when I was in high school. That when I was in high school, like I remember like my father just being really, really harsh, really. Like it's like they say like usually your senior year of high school, sometimes you have opportunities to screw around and do what you want, really. And sometimes, in some cases you have a parent that's like, you know what, you're under my roof for one more year and I'm just going to be the biggest, hard ass on you type of thing, really. And as I learned as I got older, sometimes parents are like this because of narcissism and ego issues. Sometimes parents are like this because they're like, well, you're going out in the real world. You're going to college, really. So I want you to actually just not like me. So that way you do right, really, and you don't have to come back to me type of thing, really. The same way in movies like Full Metal Jacket, there's that famous line, the more you hate me, the more that you'll learn. And I also will say, and pardon me, there's a bunch of noisy ass kids outside. So what happened was that I remember like one time I got school at 7 a.m. and I remember like how there was like one day where I wouldn't, like, sometimes I will forget to brush my teeth, or sometimes I would just like have a banana for breakfast, really. Like there was a rule in my house, like there was a certain amount of food that constitute a breakfast or a meal and stuff like that. Like, you have a banana, that's not enough, really. Or I also remember, like, there was a rule, like, okay, if you're going to make eggs for yourself, it's 2 eggs. If you're going to have a sandwich, it's 2 slices of meat and a slice of and like 3 or 4 slices of vegetables. Like these really like particular rules. And I remember, like, what happened was that I didn't brush my teeth. So the bus was about to come like less than 5 minutes. So I remember like about to head out the door. My dad said, I didn't see you brush my teeth. You brush your teeth, really. So he started like shoving me and pushing me, like, pushing me back and being like, hey, none of my children go outside to you're going to go outside without brushed teeth, really. And I remember like my dad standing right by me as I was brushing my teeth, like, that's good. Do a little bit there, do a little bit there, like nodding and everything's like that, really. And then I missed my bus, really. And my brother, and it was also one of the things that the bus was running late, really. So my dad was like saying, like take out the garbage. Oh no, give your brother a hug. Oh no, well, walk the dog, type of thing, really. He was like kind of like throwing an obstacle. So he made me miss my bus, really. And I remember like my dad, like, just like driving, saying like, now you got to walk to school. And then I remember like, as I was walking to school, my dad just got in the car and be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to drive you to school, really. And I kind of wanted to give him the middle finger. And I'd be like, well, fuck you, really. Because, he just like disrespected me. And he was like fucking around with me, just to kind of be like an asshole. But I kind of like, understood what he was trying to say. What he was trying to say is like, there's always a rhyme and a reason. There's a point to things. And really, you just can't wing things or do what you want, really. Like, there's a reason why, you wake up, you shower, you have breakfast, you brush your teeth, and all that stuff, really, and I'm not going to let you wing things. But it was kind of almost like, as I said, too, when you get to a point of like shoving a kid or, like being like, okay, well, the kid's running around because they don't want to miss the bus and whatever. Oh, well, it's funny to watch the kid kind of like, get stressed out and worried and like, just be running around kind of like, superly anxious and stuff like that. And it kind of goes down to what I've said about like being a child of the 90s and the early 2000s, which was parents really taught their children that the adult is allowed to disrespect you and you have to take it, really. And that's kind of like what I grew up with. But again, we can all agree that push and shoving a kid and other things like that and being like kind of obnoxious, like, oh, well, you need to brush a little here, you need to brush a little there. Other things like that. That's a little, I'm not sure what the word is, but that's like a little just being like dramatic or like just like a little overdoing it. But that's one of the reasons why I didn't have like a good relationship with my dad, because he was always that type of person that was always like, you know what, and as I said, like when you really think about it, like I told people in another video that I made like a cold cut sandwich, and my dad slapped me in the face in front of the relatives during a Christmas party because he was mad that I took more than two slices of meat, really, and he was kind of smiling and grinning at me. Or I remember like one time I went to a restaurant and everybody was grabbing a piece of bread, and my dad slapped me in the face because I didn't wash my hands, but nobody else was washing their hands really, or other things like that. But it's also kind of like why what I've said about like what happens as an adult really. Like I don't have a family. I don't want to have kids because I would use domestic violence because I was kind of raised with smacking and hitting people, throwing furniture and screaming and yelling, and that the idea that children are just like slaves really. Like I mean I hate even saying this. Sometimes when I work at a hospital, and there's a little baby screaming, I may be like, you know what, that kid needs a couple of spankings. Or sometimes when I'm on a plane, there's a kid crying, like 1 or 2 years old. I'm like, they need to bend the kid over, lay the kid on its stomach, and wail on that kid's ass because I grew up with that type of, you know what, nobody gives a fuck about me. Nobody gives a fuck about my boundaries and whatever really because I grew up with disrespect, or parents are like, oh well, it's fine to watch you run around and be worried about missing the bus, so I'm gonna fuck with you, just to kind of like fuck with you, really, type of thing, really. But like, did the message ever get across, really? I think in some ways it didn't because I kind of was like, okay, it was more like a power trip, really, and sometimes parents will do that, and that's how I felt with how I was raised. But I also understood that my dad was abused growing up, and my grandmother used to slap him a lot and just tell him to shut up all the time and just be really, really disrespectful. So I kind of understand how my dad became like a narcissist in a way, or almost maybe like, well, maybe I'm better, or maybe like, because he's so used to people being hard on him or expectations on him that he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna look down at people as well. Because some people do that where they go through a lot of hardships or deeper, or like maybe a more stricter upbringing, and they're like, well, I'm gonna look down at people and other shit like that. But ultimately, as I've said before, and I will say it again, really, that ultimately how you treat children is very, very important. I mean, if you treat them in a way where it's almost like, okay, well, you know what, I'm going to push you, I'm going to shove you, I'm going to make big deals about small stuff like, like the brushing of teeth, then you really have to kind of like really reevaluate yourselves, because, it's just, it's just like, as I said, like how do you really raise a child if you have a philosophy of tolerating disrespect, of showing disrespect to raise a child? And I understand sometimes you gotta be harsh on the kid, sometimes you gotta make a point, really. But sometimes you gotta just not be, just overbearing. I remember one time that there was a rule in the house that like you get up, you walk the dog, and then you shower and whatever. I remember one time I just did what I wanted to. I just took a shower before walking the dog. And then my dad did something where he flipped out. He said, okay, since you're not doing what you're supposed to do, I'm going to stay home all day. So my dad just like sat on the couch. He blasted the television. He was like swigging a couple of beers. And then, then he just, went to work really and just kind of said, like, I'm trying to make a point really. But sometimes, we have parents with theatrics really, but now he's going to work, a little drunk. And he's swigging alcohol and he's being passive aggressive, really. And it kind of goes down to what I've said, really, where and I kind of realized this too, that I did have parents that are almost like, you know what, well, I want you to not like me being around because that way you're going to develop independence, really. Because you're not going to like when I'm there and I'm being the parent, really, so that's what it is. But that's also bad in a way, really, because it's kind of like, the thing that happens in a lot of parenting styles where if you kind of screw over a kid or you emotionally manipulate a kid into doing better or to raising them, that's just, not the right way to do it, because then again, you may have kids who become way too independent. And I remember, like, as I said in another video, I remember my dad making I'm saying something like you're autistic, you don't know how to make a sandwich, so therefore I'm gonna make your lunch every single day, and me throwing away sandwiches because I'm like, you know what, well, fuck you, because that's not true. It's just because one day my younger brother thought salami was pepperoni because my dad was telling him that salami was pepperoni because he wanted to have an unhealthy pepperoni sandwich. And I didn't hear the message that don't touch the salami because my dad's trying to manipulate my brother to think it's pepperoni, so he's not going to be screaming and complaining. But the point of it is that that manipulation and just disrespecting your children is never a good way to raise them, because you're going to have kids with low self-esteem. You may have kids who grow up to be antisocial, or you may have kids who just say, I don't want to develop interpersonal skills because I grew up with a lot of just like bullying and disrespect and manipulation. And then also feeling like they can never earn respect because of how they were raised and stuff like that, really. And I know it's kind of minor, but that's kind of impacted my personality, affected me, because sometimes I don't have relationships, or sometimes I get mad when I get manipulated or lied to, and sometimes like when I do filmmaking, like there's been many times where I've stopped doing filmmaking because there's a lot of liars and manipulators. And it does kind of come from my childhood, where it's kind of like, okay, well, you are to be disrespected, really, and you have to suck it up and take it. You are to be manipulated. Parents can put their hands on you. Parents can push and shove you over small deals. And part of being an adult is, when you have a child, you have free reign to, be like a security guard and push and shove and smack and hit and scream and yell and throw furniture, and the kid has to take it, really. And as I said, it nurtures a sociopath, antisocial disorder, which is something that I believe I do have, really. But again, how we treat children is very important, and sometimes we gotta let some small things go. Like a kid not brushing their teeth for one day, that's not gonna kill them. If it's a day-to-day thing, you gotta be like, hey, then that might be appropriate, but it wasn't really. It was just, there's rules, there's an order, there's a structure, and you just gotta follow it. And sometimes, people will react when one small thing's not being followed.